Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. And if you can hear me, those of you who are here with me live this evening, please raise your hands just to let me know that I can be heard. Yes, very good. Thank you very much. I hope your new year is off to a very good start this last week and that your resolutions are all holding up. And let's go ahead and take care of the rest of our usual housekeeping chores. So if you are new to the satsang and you're live with us this evening, you can adjust your audio settings and viewing options in the upper right-hand corner. No need to worry about your mic or your video camera. If you would like to be seen or heard, type something into the chat window to share a question or a comment. Last week, thanks to some very excellent questions, which I'm always very happy to reply to, irrespective of what that does to my plan for the evening, we got through a portion of what I intended through verses 4 through 8. We spoke about offerings and different qualities of nature and how we are what we eat. And we'll speak about that a little more as we move into this evening's class. We'll pick up where we left off with more of we are what we eat. And we'll speak about judging according to elevation or degradation of consciousness. This is not a very popular thing in modern thinking, to judge anything, and particularly to judge anyone. And I'm going to share some examples of the difference between using good judgment and getting defensive about being judged. So we'll talk a little bit about the role of judging in yoga and whether there is a place for such things or not. And we'll talk about offerings, or in other words, sacrifices, according to the modes of material nature. So that's our plan for this evening. First order of business is to chant our invocation mantra. So for anyone who is new to transliterated Sanskrit, the dot over the M indicates we close our lips as we normally would with an M, but at the same time, we close the back of our tongue up to the back of the roof of our mouths, kind of making a round shape with our mouth. The bar across a vowel, in this case an A, indicates a long and open version of that vowel, ah, instead of a short and contained version, ah. And with that, I will chant the mantra, and if you like, you can chant it back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the son of Vasudeva, Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita, who is the all-pervading transcendence. All right. So last week, we left off with verses 7 and 8 of the 17th chapter. We begin with this verse, verse 7. Even culinary tastes differ among people in this threefold fashion, as do offerings, austerities, and charity. Now hear of these distinctions. So in this threefold fashion refers to the three qualities of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And as I've spoken about previously, this lens of the three qualities of material nature, seeing people, places, and things in terms of these three qualities of material nature, is probably the most underrated tool that we have in a yogi's toolbox in order to understand ourselves, understand everyone else, understand how the world is working, how the world is moving. So understanding these various things that we do, how we offer things, what kind of austerities we perform, what kind of charity we give, and certainly what kind of food we like. In terms of these three qualities of material nature is really, really valuable. The next verse, verse 8, foods that expand the duration of one's life, purify one's existence, and give strength, health, happiness, and satisfaction, that are succulent, flavorful, wholesome, and pleasing, are dear to those who are influenced by the quality of goodness. So when we think about these three qualities of material nature, we're talking about a hierarchical triad with goodness at the top. That is to say, in yoga, we understand from a position of humility that for the most part, most of us are influenced by the qualities of passion and ignorance. And if we're honest about ourselves and we see ourselves reflected in the pages of Bhagavad-gita, then we can see that this is the case. And our objective is to purify our hearts and elevate our consciousness up to the mode of goodness, which acts as a platform or a launching pad for transcendence, or shuddha sattva, pure goodness, clear goodness is a good way to understand shuddha sattva. So foods that are in the mode of goodness make the food body, the annamaya kosha, the outermost covering of the spirit soul, known as the body that's made of food, the five physical material elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, solids, liquids, radiant energy, gases, and space. This is the stuff of our physical body. And when we feed the physical body food that is healthy and pure, etc., then we set the stage for purifying the metaphysical body. In the Hatha Yoga tradition, that's the first order of business before ethics and before anything else. The practices are designed to purify the physical body and then the metaphysical body, that is to say, the energy body, our body of prana. And when those two things, our physical and first layer of metaphysical coverings, are purified, then the mind and the heart and the intelligence follow. So either way, whether you're following the Hatha Yoga tradition or the Bhakti Yoga tradition or the Raja Yoga tradition, Karma Yoga, any of this, it's the same principle is going to apply. That what we put into our food body, our physical body, is going to affect our energy body, which is the bridge, the connection to our mental, emotional body. And, you know, I'm sure we have this experience about how the food that we take into our physical body has an effect on the more subtle body. This is also why it's so important from a social standpoint to make healthy food available to everyone so that everyone's consciousness is elevated rather than degraded by cheap, processed, junky food. So what kind of foods are we talking about? We're talking about milk products, but hold the phone. The first thing a good vegan will say about this is you're exploiting the cow. Well, in Vedic culture, in the original culture of yoga, you don't exploit the cow. You have a very symbiotic relationship with naturally domestic animals like cows and bulls and such like that. So milk products, when they are given to us by cows whom we take care of, very much in the mode of goodness, very healthy. You can do a zillion different things with milk, yogurt, cheese, so many things. It's not, the relationship is not meant to be exploitive. Cows are not meant to be seen as commercial objects. So sugar, good for me. I've got a sweet tooth, so I'm very happy to see sugar listed in the list of foods that are in the mode of goodness. Rice, wheat, fruits, vegetables, these are all the kind of foods that fall into this category that Krishna is speaking of here. Protein, amply available through split peas and dal and whole wheat, vegetable protein, etc. The science of Ayurveda, I began to speak about this last week, is the science of extending the lifespan of the material body. And if you are interested in a really excellent book on Ayurvedic cooking, this is one of my favorites, so I'm going to give Divya a plug here. What to Eat for How You Feel, the New Ayurvedic Kitchen, is a wonderful book of Ayurvedic recipes, and I am going to quick copy the link into the chat, and I will also put it in the newsletter that I send out tomorrow. So if any of you are interested, I just realized this is the Smile Amazon link that I just gave you, which may not work for you since that is associated with the particular charities that benefit every time I buy something. But if it does work for you, then great, you can benefit my charities as well. I'm sure you will like them. Anyway, so this is a very, very good book for foods that are in the mode of goodness, if you are interested in such things. I'm bringing this verse back from the 9th chapter because Krishna has already spoken about the foods that, or the kind of foods that can be offered to him, the kind that he will accept. He's recommended that whatever we do as an offering, including what we eat. And then he gives us some specific categories. And this verse, the 26th verse of the 9th chapter, is where he does that. So I'm putting that on the screen for us to chant because it's a really, really important verse in the Bhagavad-gita. And therefore, I thought we should go back and chant it, and then I will give you the translation in just a moment. So, a little bit more about transliterated Sanskrit here. A dot under an S is an SH sound, standard SH sound. The dot over the M we've already discussed. The bar over a vowel we've already discussed. A C is always a CH sound, and sometimes you get a C followed by a CH, which means you double it up and put a little air after the second CH because the H is an H sound all by itself. A Y at the end of a word is going to be a Y sound that moves right into the vowel that begins the next word rather than being an E sound. A dot under an H at the end of a word, at the end of a line, indicates a short version of the vowel that precedes it is to be echoed back. And an accent mark over an S is also an SH sound, but it's a deeper SH sound from further back in your mouth. So a sh sound as opposed to a sh sound. And Jill, yes, Divya from the Bhakti Center in New York City She also has a really excellent restaurant on First Avenue and First Street, or First Street just up above First Avenue, between First and Second, called Divya's Kitchen, I believe. So those of you in New York City or going to New York City, you should go. Okay, so we will chant the Sanskrit for this verse, one line at a time. I'll chant, and if you like, you can chant back. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo me bhaktya prayachchati tad aham bhaktyupahritam ashnami prayatatmanaha I left out the R with a dot underneath it, which is an R sound with your tongue curled up toward the middle of your roof of your mouth, rather than an R sound with your top teeth out in front of your lower lip. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's try that again. All right, now I know two ways to do that. Translation: I will accept a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water as an offering of devotion from whoever presents them to me in a mood of pure devotion. So this verse earlier on in the Gita connects two things that we're going to find in this chapter: foods that are purifying and healthy and succulent, etc., and the idea of sacrifice or offering. In the verses that follow this verse, 27 and 28, Krishna continues to elaborate on this idea, saying, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice, whatever gifts you give, whatever austerities you perform, do it as an offering to me, for by doing so, you will be freed from the bondage of actions, reactions, both good and bad. By linking yourself to me through this principle of renunciation, you shall attain liberation and come to me. So there's a lot going on in this verse that Krishna is now, in the 17th chapter, separating out into numerous verses in order to give it even more detail. So once again, the elliptical pattern of the Bhagavad-gita, where here in the 9th chapter, Krishna speaks in just one or two verses, three verses altogether, and packs a lot of information in. And now out in the 17th chapter is pulling it out into greater detail. So in this chapter, we'll hear about austerities. We'll hear about giving gifts. We'll hear about offerings. And in each case, when all of these things are done as an offering to Krishna, remember the 9th chapter is about bhakti yoga, then they are liberating. In other words, you are freed from the reactions to your actions. No karma, no good karma, no bad karma, no karma. So we spoke in our previous classes about the question, does it make sense to abide by scripture? And what we find is that Krishna is speaking about deference to Krishna on a different level. It's not just a matter of logic. It's a matter of placing reasonable faith in these principles that are being described in this scripture, in particular, Bhagavad-gita, and related scriptures, result in the elevation of consciousness and freedom from karma, liberation from the entanglement of material consciousness. And for a yogi, that's very logical, because our objective is the purification of the heart, the elevation of consciousness, and freedom from the influence of the qualities of material nature and the obligation to experience reactions to our actions. So we'll spend the rest of our time going deeper into the next few verses, but before I move on, I just want to find out if anyone has any questions or comments that they would like to toss into the chat for us to discuss. I'm actually very happy to be diverted by any questions or comments that you may have. In the meantime, wishing someone would teach Hatha Yoga again. Well, there must be somebody out there teaching Hatha Yoga. There's plenty of yoga teachers. And I know there are some here in DC, and I'll prove it in just a few minutes. Meanwhile, let's take a look at our verses going forward. So we're going to cover verses 9 through 13. So as is our usual program, I will read just the translations all the way through, then we'll go back to each verse and look at them in detail. So verse 9 of chapter 17, the translation is, foods that are excessively bitter, sour, salty, hot, pungent, dry, and burning are dear to those who are influenced by the mode of passion. Such foods give rise to distress, misery, and disease. Verse 10. Foods that are spoiled, tasteless, rancid, and stale, consisting of rejected remnants and that which is impure, are dear to those who are influenced by the mode of darkness. Verse 11. An offering that is made in accordance with scriptural directives by one who is free from the desire to enjoy the fruits of their offering with full concentration, and the attitude that such offerings are to be performed for their own sake, is an offering in the mode of goodness. Text 12. An offering performed as a prideful show of religiosity for the sake of gaining a material benefit, however, should be understood to be an offering in the mode of passion, O best of the Bharatas. Arjuna. Verse 13. An offering made without any basis in scriptural directives, with neither the distribution of food, nor the recitation of mystical sounds, nor any donations to spiritual leaders, and devoid of faith, is understood to be an offering in the mode of ignorance. So that covers foods in the mode of passion and ignorance, and different kinds of offerings or sacrifices, as we will see as we look more carefully at each verse. Okay, so back to verse 9. This is a great disappointment to me. I actually like food that's, I don't know about excessively bitter, but I like bitter, sour, salty. I like really extreme flavorful stuff. I like spices, like really spicy stuff. And therefore, I can understand, since foods that are excessively bitter, sour, salty, hot, pungent, dry, and burning are dear to those who are influenced by the mode of passion. Therefore, there you have it. I'm influenced by the mode of passion. Oh well. Such foods give rise to distress, misery, and disease. Certainly, if this is where your diet is based, then you can get problems. You know, you can have heartburn. You can have diseases if you eat too much of the wrong kinds of food. This is something that is speaking about intensities. You know, people who really enjoy intensity of stuff, enjoy intense food, and therefore, you know, there's usually a price to pay for this kind of stuff. Whereas someone who is trying to control the senses will make more of an effort to eat stuff that's just not going to inflame or blow out the senses quite so much. Just easier to control the senses when spices are used to make food flavorful, but not so intense as to cause digestive difficulties or agitate the senses. The next verse will apply to Jill's question about mushrooms. Foods that are spoiled, tasteless, rancid, and stale, consisting of rejected remnants, and that which is impure, are dear to those who are influenced by the mode of darkness or the mode of ignorance. You know, old food, tasteless food, stale food, leftovers. You know, we always, you know, nobody wants to waste food. So from a yogic perspective, at any given time, we make we prepare only as much food as we're actually going to eat at that time, rather than prepare so much food that we end up with a pile of leftovers that last for days. And, you know, this is like the kind of standard Thanksgiving thing. You know, it's like you've got a ton of food left over and you're going to be eating it for a week. Well, that's actually considered to be in the mode of ignorance, not particularly good. Now, mushrooms. It depends on the mushroom. I'm not a real expert on this. I was under the impression that just because of the nature of the condition under which mushrooms grow, they were necessarily in the mode of ignorance or darkness. And, you know, I'm not so sure that that's always the case. I think it depends on the mushroom. I know, at least from secondhand information, that yogis in my particular lineage have been known to eat certain kinds of mushrooms, so I have to assume they're not all bad. So I'm a little not entirely sure. I don't eat mushrooms, therefore I never have to figure this out. But there may be other people who are a little more expert on this than I am. Sorry, I can't offer you a more detailed explanation. If any of you who are here with me this evening in our group know something more specific about mushrooms and the modes of material nature, please feel free to chime in. Narayani. Don't forget the spiritual impacts of eating from passion or pleasure. It's not just about the physical, of course. Yeah, so there's a few different moving parts here. Thank you very much for contributing that insight, because there's what you eat, and then there is the mood in which you eat it. And this is also a part of Ayurveda, giving your attention to what you are eating, not eating while, you know, doing something else, but rather like looking at your food, hanging out with your food, just being with your body as it takes the food in, being with the food that you are taking into your body. And then the understanding of what's the complete cycle. Where does this food come from? It's like magic, actually. It's pretty amazing. The idea of making an offering of whatever you eat is to make a spiritual connection between yourself and the source of yourself. your body and the source of your body and the maintainer of your body. When you see food as a gift and the matter of which the food is made as a transformation of spiritual energy, the whole experience of eating is very different than if you don't really give it any thought at all and just think, I'm hungry, this tastes good, I'm eating it for the sake of getting rid of the problem of being hungry and enjoying the flavor of the food. We can turn eating into yoga, but that means doing, what it means is eating a particular kind of food in the category of the mode of goodness, and then elevating it even further by making that food an offering, and then eating in the mindset of spiritual relationships, the relationship between ourselves and the ultimate source of the food that nourishes this body, which is made of a transformation of spiritual energy into a material body. Annie, I need to say, if you want to avoid food from the mode of darkness, please don't try the plant-based Impossible Burger. In a moment of temporary insanity, I tried one about an hour and a half ago. It was absolutely disgusting. I had to throw it away. I don't believe any plant gives its life for that vile thing. Avoid it at all costs. It's really funny you should mention that, Annie. Because, actually, I had one of those for dinner too. And I didn't have quite the same negative reaction to it. However, there is a problem with avoiding food that has anything to do with animals. It ends up being processed to a degree that your Ayurvedic physician might say, this isn't good for you either. Is it better for the environment? Is it like more eco-friendly? Probably is. Is it any good? I guess that's a matter of taste. And there's the issue of how do you navigate this in the modern world from the standpoint of how much time do you really have to prepare meals that you're only going to eat the amount that you made, and then tomorrow you got to do it again. Our society is not geared towards the mode of goodness. It's actually geared towards the mode of passion and ignorance. And even when people try to come up with an alternative to animal-based products, we end up with Impossible Burgers precisely because we're influenced by the modes of passion and ignorance. It's kind of moving in the direction of goodness. The whole idea that we can make something that's quick and easy is in the mode of passion because we're busy doing other things. And the idea that technology will save us from the problems that have been created by technology. This is also in the mode of passion and ignorance. Anyway, so thank you very much for your comment. And I'm sorry that you didn't enjoy your dinner. And I will leave it to all of you to decide whether Impossible Burgers are possible for you. In the meantime, Ramanuja, the founder of the Sri Sampradaya, which is a Vaishnava or theological sampradaya, of which Krishnamacharya, the grandfather of modern yoga, is a member, has this to say about what foods constitute foods in the mode of ignorance. He says, partaking of foods in tamaguna, such as meat, fish, fowl, eggs, wine, alcohol, etc., breeds dark nescience and great ignorance. Now, this is really bad news for modern yogis who don't really want to be judged on the basis of whether or not they consume alcohol or whether or not they eat meat. I am a member of a forum for yoga teachers, and one of my colleagues, who's a serious yogi, just threw out the question for the group. It was a way of starting out the new year. The question was for everyone in this forum, what's your opinion on yoga teachers drinking alcohol or using drugs, pot generally, which in Washington, D.C. here is legal, so that seems to be the movement of things. So, so she wasn't necessarily speaking about illegal drugs, but kind of really talking about recreational intoxication. So alcohol and marijuana. She was not talking about yoga and beer or drunk yoga classes, but rather what teachers do in their regular lives. Should a yoga teacher be sober as part of living a healthy lifestyle or being a good example? How do you interpret yogic teachings in this regard? And it was really interesting to see what yoga teachers said in response. Remember, the question was, how do you interpret yogic teachings in this regard as to what standard a yoga teacher should hold themselves to or be held to by students? One studio owner chimed in that, you know, ultimately it's the student who decides whether the teacher is worthy of being their yoga teacher. And I thought that was a kind of a good way to think about it. Some of the yoga teachers themselves made light of it. One saying it's best to drink wine, beer, or a cocktail after you teach your yoga class. Some were pretty defensive. You know, there were responses like, it's none of your business, none of anybody's business. It sounds like a hostile question that you're asking people to judge or critique yoga instructors who are just trying to bring joy to people's lives. So what's the big idea here? Others said some things like, I've struggled with the idea that drinking and being a yoga teacher is bad. And as someone who socially drinks, I feel I'm worse off trying to restrict it. And I thought this was a particularly interesting response because rather than framing this question as we're discussing it in terms of the elevation or degradation of consciousness relative to the three qualities of material nature, a lot of these responses were about being judged as good or bad based on whether or not you could live up to a standard that's seen as kind of anachronistic or maybe unattainable, unrealistic. So back in the second chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, here's something else that Krishna has to say about this mentality and what a yoga practitioner, to say nothing of a teacher, should aspire to. This is texts 58 and 59, where Krishna says, one who can withdraw their senses from the objects of the senses, as a tortoise withdraws its limbs into a shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. Though the objects of the senses recede for the embodied soul who abstains from them, the taste for such objects remains. By acquiring a higher taste for that which is far superior, the taste for sense objects fades as well. So here, the understanding is that even if you abstain you'll still have a taste for it. And I've spoken about this before myself, that if I go out and about, I don't usually go out and about in like the parts of town where partying is going on. But if I'm ever somehow or other there, I know that the smell of marijuana will be in the street. And going all the way back from a younger day, I still associate that smell with getting high, with having fun. So I have a positive association here. That taste is still there, even though I no longer engage in that particular activity. When we live in a society where it's just considered to be normal to go out for a drink after a yoga class, and where we are bombarded by everything in our environment that encourages us to indulge our senses, or we live lives where we need to medicate ourselves with legal intoxicants just to deal with the stresses of our lives. There was one teacher who was a teacher like of little kids, who after school thought, you know, I just need to have a glass of wine to just chill out from like dealing with, you know, my class. It becomes really challenging. And one's yoga practice has to give one a deeper sense of joy and satisfaction, so much so that it's a good trade, that you actually acquire a higher taste that is subverted by the indulgence of the senses, and therefore you don't have to work so hard to resist the invitation of the media and advertising and of society to indulge in these things. Because if you did, it would actually spoil your high. It would actually be a buzzkill to do any of these things. The buzz of your yoga practice is of such a high quality, you wouldn't want to undermine it. Anyway, so just to wrap this up, you know, there were a few teachers who got really mad about the whole idea of being judged in this way. There were a few who said that they've cut back on these things, that they found drinking to be a kind of inner violence, and also have seen the, you know, the damage that it's done. Yogis who spoke about how consuming this kind of stuff was hindering to their practice, and they have arrived at a point where the bad outweighs the good, and therefore they abstain from this sort of thing. So the replies were often defensive or evasive, and focused on making judgments based on conceptions of right and wrong and good and bad. And there were also a lot of varieties of interpretation about the role of intoxicants from outside the Vedic yoga tradition. That is to say, wandering off to different spiritual traditions and their relationships with other kinds of drugs and, you know, that sort of thing. But the replies never address the question from the standpoint of the elevation of consciousness or the degradation of consciousness as described in the Yoga Wisdom text. Specifically, no one really talked about the relationship between intoxicants and the three qualities of material nature, which gets back to my original point that this is the most, in my view, one of the most undervalued and misunderstood elements of yoga philosophy. And if we look at these topics from the standpoint of the goal of yoga in the tradition of yoga being the elevation of consciousness through the qualities of material nature, from ignorance to passion to goodness and then beyond, it reframes the whole question. So speaking of questions, if you have any, please go ahead and pop them in the window. Let me see what Narayani has to say. If Krishna is advising even to watch intake of spices, etc., then certainly using those substances for pleasure is a no-go. Must constantly be evolving on the path and be transparent about it, whatever direction one's going. Yeah, all right, that's a very, very nice comment. Thank you for sharing that thought with us. That did also come up, the idea of transparency, whether or not it was a yoga student's business, what a yoga teacher did once they left the classroom, or whether it mattered what a yoga teacher's lifestyle was beyond a yoga studio class. And it really depends on what is your conception of yoga and the goal of yoga, I think. The place of your physical practice, the place of your meditation practice in a commercial environment. Evelyn, what if it's medication? Like, for example, flower essences or plant medicines extracted and preserved in alcohol? Well, that's different. If it's for medicinal purposes, then you're talking about healing and therefore nourishing and therefore something that the purpose of this medication is now nested in the mode of goodness because it's meant to be healing, or even for killing pain. I mean, morphine is a pretty powerful drug. There's a place for that as well. You know, if a yogi has to have surgery, I would be very, very impressed if they would reject morphine after the fact, because they were so elevated that they could ignore the fact that their body was in so much pain. I know very elevated yogis, devotional yogis, who have spoken very specifically about this point. You know, that the use of drugs for deadening pain for the sake of healing and taking care of your body, and thinking that your body is something that you should take care of, that you have a responsibility to take care of, and therefore you take the medicines prescribed by a physician. That is also a transcendentally good activity if it's done in the right mindset. So Evelyn, I hope that answers your question about that. So, we have some stuff in the Q&A as well. Shamala, does one need to study the Bhagavad-gita in order to understand the relationship between what you consume, effects on, and the three modes of material nature? All right, I'm holding on. You sent it a little quick. I suspect that the answer is going to be yes, but go ahead and type in the rest of your question so I can make sure I get the whole thing. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to go back to our screen because we're going to chant one more verse this evening, verse 11. And this one will be a challenging verse to chant. It's one of those verses that has one of these mile-long Sanskrit words. Yes, we know. We're in these verses. Okay. Righty. So this is verse 11. In transliterated Sanskrit, a PH is a P sound as opposed to an F sound, not like phantasmagoria. A Y is a Y sound, but sometimes it can also take on a J sound, especially in this word, jhagyo. A J before an N with a tilde over it combines the two to make a gya sound. So it's more like a GY sound rather than a JN sound. So the last word of the first line will be pronounced yagyo. And that's really it for, two consonants together, as in two T's together, means you're going to pronounce both T's. You won't merge them together into a D-ish sound like the American English word letter, but rather you'll hit the first T and then hit the second T as well. So we'll chant this verse, and then Shamala, I'll come back to your question. Okay, here we go. Apalakankshabhir jhagyo vidhi dishtoya ijyate Yashtavyam evati manaha. Samadhaya sasatvikaha. Translation: an offering that is made in accordance with scriptural directives by one who is free from the desire to enjoy the fruits of their offering with full concentration and with the attitude that such offerings are to be performed for their own sake is an offering in the mode of goodness. So in this verse, the word jhagyo or jagya means sacrifice or an offering. The word yashtavyam in the third line means must be performed. So in other words, when one does this just as a matter of duty, because it should be done, that's considered to be in the mode of goodness. I've spoken in earlier classes about how the philosophy of the Bhagavad-gita is a deontological philosophy. That is, you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And when you have that mood of that's why you do it, just because it should be done, then that is sattvikaha, or in the mode or quality, the nature of goodness. Back in the 9th chapter, Krishna speaks about the nature of sacrifice, where he says in the 3rd chapter, rather 9th verse, act only for the sake of offering your actions to Vishnu, free from attachment, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, for by such perfect action you will be liberated from all reactions associated with your deeds. Otherwise, your actions will bind you to this world. So again, this idea of sacrifice without attachment to results, having a liberating effect rather than an entangling effect. So before I go on to the last 2 verses, which speak about offering sacrifices in the modes of passion and ignorance, let me get back to Shamala's question. So, does one need to study Bhagavad-gita in order to understand the relationship between what you consume, its effects, the 3 modes of material nature, the effects on your consciousness, etc.? In order to understand the modes of nature, do you need to study the Gita, or are there other yogic texts that teachers can gain that knowledge? Good question. There are other texts. However, the most accessible text for understanding the 3 qualities of material nature, I think, is the Bhagavad-gita. The qualities of material nature are referred to in the Yoga Sutras, and you really need to have a translation and commentary on the Yoga Sutras that goes into what these 3 qualities of material nature are. For that purpose, I recommend Edwin Bryant's edition of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, because he gives a very complete and lucid explanation of what is Patanjali referring to here. Since Patanjali's teachings are in the form of sutras, they're codified, they're very compressed teachings, and therefore he, in the sutras themselves, does not give a lot of explanation, so you need the commentaries. Krishna directly explains these qualities of material nature and how to recognize them in actions and objects in the world, and psychological qualities of people in the world. So yeah, my recommendation for understanding the qualities of material nature is the Bhagavad-gita, and I think that's one reason why, particularly in the modern yoga community, there isn't as much of an understanding of the qualities of material nature other than that they're associated with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, or even what the significance of that is. Because the Bhagavad-gita is not a standard text in yogic studies for the most part. I see that starting to change. It's one of the reasons I'm offering this series of classes. Anyway, so I hope that answers your question. This is, yes, the Bhagavad-gita, I think, is the recommended best source of information for the practical understanding of the qualities of material nature. Annie, I liked what you said about looking at alcohol and pot, etc., in terms of elevating or degrading consciousness rather than judging as good, bad, right, wrong. That works as a guide. Thank you. Yeah, that reframes it. It's no longer about being judgmental, as opposed, it's about using good judgment based on what is your objective? What are you trying to achieve in your yoga practice? Which brings us to our last two verses. So once again, the translation, verse 12, an offering performed as a prideful show of religiosity for the sake of gaining a material benefit, however, should be understood to be an offering in the mode of passion, O best of the Bharatas. So we see sometimes people will put on a show of being a good person when actually they've got an ulterior motive. They want to get something from this. And even innocently so. We find that, this is what people think of as religion, as there's a business exchange. I'll worship God if God will give me the fulfillment of my material desires, even basic ones like, give us now our daily bread. It's a request for the Supreme Being to provide a service. And in exchange for that service, there's worship. And if the service is not provided, well, maybe the worship won't be there. Or maybe it's just a show of religiosity without any actual feelings or religiosity. And the benefit is not seen as coming from the Supreme Person, but from other people who will honor you for appearing to be a religious person. The idea here is if the motivation is to boost one's ego and acquire some material, the fulfillment of a material desire, then the offering or the sacrifice is being performed in a lesser mode, the mode of passion, and therefore is not as elevating to one's consciousness. And then finally, verse 13, an offering made without any basis in scriptural directives, with neither the distribution of food nor the recitation of mystical sounds, otherwise known as mantra, nor any donations to spiritual leaders, and is devoid of faith, is understood to be an offering in the mode of ignorance or darkness. So here specifically, mantra is mentioned. That is to say, if there's no chanting of mantras, if there's no sacred sound, no hymns, sometimes more this is taken to mean the hymns of the Vedas specifically, since this is a Vedic text. Dakshin means monetary contribution to the person who is the intermediary, that is, say, a priest who performs a sacrifice or a ritual or something like that. Shraddha is the word for faith. So an absence of faith, that is to say, no real connection to a spiritual objective, something higher than just what's around here in the material world. Most of what we do is like this. Most of what we see around us is this sort of thing, these last two verses. Activities influenced by the modes of passion and ignorance. And yoga is meant to lift us up to the platform of goodness from which we can aspire to something higher. So let's take last questions, and then we're going to finish up because we're at the end of our regularly scheduled program, which of course is already in progress. This is from Carla, I'd rather accept where I am now with poor dietary choices then change my diet so I can pretend to be sanctimonious. Well, that's a good, honest position to be in. Because you don't want to change your diet in order to put on a pretense of sanctimony. You don't want to change your diet for the sake of what Krishna calls here a prideful show of religiosity. Oh, look at what a good vegan I am, or what have you. You know, aren't I all that? No, the motivation that we should aspire to is eating well, that is to say, eating in a healthy way for the sake of honoring the gift of this human birth, this material body. I was reading something about a yoga teacher who was perfectly healthy and then, quite surprisingly, contracted a disease that totally stumped her doctors. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, but she just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And the turning point, the first turning point, was when she stopped getting angry at her body for betraying her in this way and started loving her body and appreciating her body, thinking how wonderful it is to have this body that can do, when it's healthy, so many wonderful, amazing things. I mean, on the one hand, it's a machine. It's a bag of bones and blood and goo and stuff. I mean, nobody wants what's inside the body to pop out. But at the same time, it's also amazing. And it's wonderful when it's working, what you can do. Simple things, just walking is amazing. I pray that I never take my ability to just walk for granted. So when we think about what we eat in terms of taking care of a sacred gift that acts as a residence, not just for ourselves within this body, but for the supreme person, the Param Atma, the Lord of the heart, that reframes the experience where it's not pretentious, it's authentic. And aspiring to that kind of authenticity in anything that we do, including whatever we eat, is really what we're looking for. So yeah, I think that self-love begins with accepting where you're at, and then progressively moving as one is able and as one feels inspired to do that which one feels is the right thing to do for the sake of doing the right thing, is how we should approach this. So Carla, thank you very much for your comment. So let's wrap it up. Tonight's program, we talked about, we finished up Krishna speaking about how we are what we eat and how what we eat affects our consciousness. We spoke about judging according to elevation or degradation of consciousness rather than judging according to good or bad or right or wrong. And we spoke a little bit about sacrifices or offerings according to the modes of material nature. We covered verses 8 through 13 this evening. So here's our last call for questions. If you have anything else to share in the chat or in the Q&A box, if that's your preference, please go ahead and do so. If you're watching this after the fact or you have questions that come up after the fact, please write to me, Hari at hari-kirtana.com. I'm always very, very happy to hear from you. And hey, here's a quick word from our sponsor. My Sanskrit Made Simple for Yoga Teachers free online masterclass is available on my website. So just go ahead to my homepage. You'll see it in a drop-down menu. It's a separate enrollment, so even if you're a subscriber, please go ahead and enroll using the field to get started. And the class lasts only 45 minutes. It's also an introduction to my online course, Practical Sanskrit for Yoga Teachers, in case you would like to dive deeper into using Sanskrit in your yoga classes and workshops if you are a yoga teacher. Next week, we are going to speak about austerity, the first value of yoga, or the first pillar of Dharma. We'll also speak about charity and the three qualities of material nature, and we'll cover verses 14 through 22, I think. We'll see how it goes. And Annie wants to know, what is the name, once again, of the New York City restaurant? So the best, no doubt about it, Ayurvedic, vegan Ayurvedic, or at least vegetarian, I think it's vegan Ayurvedic restaurant in New York City, Divya's Kitchen on First Avenue. I think it's 25 First Avenue. Shamala, you may know specifically if you remember the exact address, but I think it's 25 First Avenue. It's right above First Street. So just right up from the F train subway stop on Houston Street, come up and halfway before you get to Second Street on First Avenue, right across the street from Lucky Chang's. If Lucky Chang's is still even there. It's been a little while since I've been up to the city. Anyway, that's where you'll find it. And so if you go, please have a wonderful time and tell Divya I said hi. And I think that's it. That's all. Folks, thank you very, very much for being here with me this evening, or whenever you happen to be being here with me. It's always a great pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you spending your time with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, rest of your day, rest of your week, rest of your life. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. So I'm going to end meeting for all. Have a great night.